After selling my startup for $75 million, the first thing I bought wasn't a beachfront mansion in Malibu or a penthouse in Manhattan. It was the same two-story colonial in Ashford Heights, Illinois, the house my parents threw me out of when I was 17. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Callum Reeves, and if you had asked my father, Doreen Reeves, what I'd amount to in life, he would have said, probably nothing without my help. My mother, Lenora Reeves, didn't yell like he did. She didn't have to. Her silence always felt like a verdict. My older sister, Brenna, was the pride of the family. Straight A's. Finance degree. Internships lined up before graduation. Meanwhile, I spent my nights in the garage building clunky prototypes and writing code for logistics software I barely understood myself. I wasn't skipping school or getting into trouble. I just wasn't following their blueprint. The night everything exploded started over dinner. Dad had printed enrollment papers for Holbrook Business Institute and slid them across the table like a contract. "You start in the fall," he said. "I'm not going," I answered. The silence after that felt nuclear. He called my startup idea childish. Said I was embarrassing the family. When I refused to back down, he stood, walked to the hallway closet, and pulled out my old duffel bag. "You want to be independent," he said. "Then be independent." By midnight, my suitcase sat on the porch, and the front door was locked behind me. The porch light shut off 5 minutes after the door locked. That part stuck with me. Not the yelling. Not my mother turning her face away while I stood there with a duffel bag. It was the light going out. Like they didn't even want to see the outline of me on the steps. I walked 3 blocks before I realized I had nowhere to go. The only person who answered my call was Harlan Pike, a quiet guy from my programming class who barely spoke above a mumble. He lived with his uncle in a cramped duplex on Mercer Street. When he opened the door and saw the bag in my hand, he didn't ask questions. He just said, "You can take the couch." The first week, I kept expecting my phone to ring. Maybe Mom checking in. Maybe Brenna softening. Instead, I got a single text from my father. "You made your choice." By morning, my debit card stopped working. Dad had access to the joint account. My health insurance was cancelled before the month ended. Brenna emailed once, not to help, but to say I was being dramatic and should apologize before I ruined my future. I picked up a night shift job at a regional shipping warehouse loading pallets for $14.25 an hour. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every inefficiency in that place made me itch. I'd stare at outdated tracking systems and think, I could fix this. After shifts, I'd go back to Harlan's place, open my battered laptop, and code until sunrise. I wasn't trying to prove them wrong yet. I was just trying to survive long enough to prove myself right. Survival turned into obsession faster than I expected. The warehouse job paid rent to Harlan's uncle and kept ramen in the cabinet, but every spare minute went into the software. I started mapping the inefficiencies I saw during shifts: lost pallets, duplicate tracking entries, late deliveries caused by outdated routing systems. What began as frustration slowly became a blueprint. Harlan wasn't flashy or ambitious, but he was steady. He handled back-end architecture while I focused on interface and optimization. By 19, we had a rough but functional logistics platform. We called it Northbridge because it was supposed to connect broken systems. We registered an LLC with money scraped together from tax refunds and overtime pay. Then came the pitching. We wore borrowed suits and presented in rented conference rooms. I memoized every line until my throat went dry. Investors listened politely, then declined with professional smiles. "You're too young. Not scalable. Come back when you have traction." 36 rejections in 11 months. Each no echoed like my father's voice. On the 37th pitch, something different happened. Maribel Kessler, a sharp-eyed investor with a reputation for backing unconventional founders, didn't interrupt once. She asked about data security, long-term automation, predictive modeling. At the end, she leaned back and said, "You built this while working night shifts?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Good. That means you won't fold when it gets harder." 2 weeks later, she wired seed funding. It wasn't millions, but it was belief. The first time I saw the deposit hit our account, I didn't think about cars or houses. I thought about the porch light going out. And I promised myself it would never define me again. Seed funding didn't change my life overnight. It just made the grind more expensive. Harlan and I moved into a cramped one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in Aurora. The hum of industrial dryers became our white noise while we built version 2.0 of Northbridge. Maribel kept pressure on us: weekly metrics, pilot partnerships, growth projections. She wasn't warm, but she was fair. And she pushed us harder than anyone ever had. 2 years in, we landed our first mid-sized client, a regional grocery distributor operating across 3 states. Their efficiency jumped 18% in 6 months using our platform. That one win opened doors. Then came the Midwest Tech Infrastructure Conference. Maribel insisted I attend. "Visibility matters," she said. I hadn't seen my parents in 5 years. I didn't expect to see them there. But Reeves Industrial Supply had a booth near the entrance, polished signage, catered coffee bar, Brenna in a tailored navy suit shaking hands like she owned the place. And then I heard it. "Callum." My father's voice. He looked older but still carried himself like the room belonged to him. He glanced at my badge, saw founder and CEO, Northbridge Systems, and let out a short laugh. "So you're still playing entrepreneur?" Brenna smiled politely. "We thought that phase would pass." Phase. Like I'd been experimenting with a hobby. I could have argued. Listed metrics. Thrown numbers at them. Instead, I said nothing. 2 weeks later, Northbridge secured a multi-state logistics contract worth more than Reeves Industrial's annual expansion budget. Industry magazines ran a feature titled, "The Young Founder Modernizing Distribution." My phone never rang. But for the first time, I knew they had seen it. Success didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like tension. After the conference, Northbridge grew fast. We expanded into predictive routing and warehouse automation analytics. Clients renewed contracts early. Maribel began talking about Series B funding. That's when I saw the press release. Reeves Industrial Supply launching new digital logistics division. Brenna quoted in the article, "We're innovating for the future." I didn't think much of it at first. Companies evolve. Markets shift. Then Harlan walked into my office one morning, pale. "Brenna called me." I stared at him. "Why would she call you?" "She said she wanted to reconnect. Then she offered to buy access to our optimization model. Said Reeves Industrial was willing to pay generously. Not partner. Not collaborate. Buy our core system." When Harlan refused, things escalated quickly. Within a month, Reeves Industrial filed a formal patent challenge against Northbridge's routing algorithm, claiming conceptual overlap with a minor logistics tool they developed years ago. It wasn't about winning. It was about slowing us down. Investors hate uncertainty. Lawsuits scare clients. I flew to Chicago to meet our attorneys. Maribel was calm, but her tone hardened. "This isn't business," she said. "This is personal." The legal battle lasted 9 months. We produced documentation proving original development, time-stamped iterations from warehouse nights, early code drafts predating anything Reeves filed. We won decisively. The court dismissed the challenge with prejudice. Reeves Industrial lost credibility in trade publications. That night, I didn't celebrate. I sat alone in my office and realized something painful. They hadn't just doubted me. They'd tried to erase me. And something inside me shifted from wanting validation to wanting independence so complete they could never reach me again. The lawsuit loss hit Reeves Industrial harder than I expected. Trade journals questioned their ethics. 2 longtime partners quietly pulled contracts. Brenna stopped appearing at industry panels. For the first time, the Reeves name wasn't synonymous with stability, it carried a hint of desperation. Meanwhile, Northbridge accelerated. We expanded into AI-assisted demand forecasting. Our platform reduced waste for national distributors by double digits. Revenue doubled year over year. Venture capital firms that once ignored us were now requesting meetings. Then the acquisition offer came. A global supply chain conglomerate, Helixara Group, approached us with a buyout proposal. $75 million. All cash. Maribel laid out the options clearly. You can scale further and chase unicorn status. Or you can secure generational wealth now. I thought about exhaustion. About Harlan sleeping under desks in the early years. About legal bills. About porch lights going dark. After weeks of negotiation, I signed. The wire transfer felt unreal. Numbers that once seemed impossible now sat in my account like quiet proof. But the strangest part wasn't the money. It was the timing. 2 days after the deal closed, I saw a real estate listing forwarded by an automated alert I'd set years ago out of curiosity. 217 Ashford Heights Drive. My childhood home. For sale. The photos looked smaller than I remembered. The paint faded. Landscaping neglected. The description mentioned motivated sellers. A separate business article that week mentioned Reeves' industrial restructuring under heavy debt. I stared at the listing for a long time. Then I called an attorney. Not out of anger. Not exactly. But because some chapters don't close until you walk back through the door yourself. I didn't call my parents. I didn't drive by the house. I didn't even tell Harlan at first. Instead, I contacted Elias Trowbridge, a real estate attorney Maribel had recommended years earlier when we negotiated office leases. Elias was precise, discreet, and allergic to drama. Exactly what I needed. I want to make an all-cash offer, I told him. No inspection contingencies. Fast close. But keep my name off everything until paperwork is final. He didn't ask why. Within 48 hours, the offer was submitted through an LLC. Within 72, it was accepted. Motivated sellers, Elias repeated when he called me. They didn't counter. That stung more than I expected. Closing day arrived quietly. I signed documents in a glass-walled office overlooking downtown Chicago. The transaction felt sterile. Just signatures, wire confirmations, notarized pages. 17 years after being told to leave, I owned the house. When I finally drove to Ashford Heights, the neighborhood looked smaller. Trees taller. Sidewalk cracks deeper. A moving truck sat in the driveway. My parents were there. Doreen carried boxes toward the truck, shoulders slightly hunched. Lenora directed movers with clipped gestures. Brenna wasn't there. They didn't see me at first. I stayed across the street, watching. There was no triumphant music in my head. No cinematic revenge moment. Just something steady. Elias had instructed the sellers to vacate by 5 p.m. At 4:52, the moving truck pulled away. At 5:07, I walked up the driveway. I unlocked the front door with my own key. The house smelled empty. And for the first time in my life, I stepped inside without asking permission. The house echoed when I walked through it. Empty walls. Scuffed hardwood floors. Faint rectangles where family photos once hung. My footsteps sounded unfamiliar, like I was trespassing in a memory. I made it halfway across the living room when the front door creaked open again. I turned. My father stood there. Doreen must have forgotten something. A folder was tucked under his arm. For a second, neither of us spoke. His eyes scanned the room, then landed on me. Confusion flickered first. Then recognition. "What are you doing here?" he asked. I didn't raise my voice. "I live here." He frowned. "The house is sold." "I know." Silence stretched between us. "You're renting?" he asked, almost dismissively. "I bought it." The words settled heavy in the air. His posture stiffened. "Through who?" "Through me." Lenora appeared behind him, breath catching when she saw my face. "Callum." It wasn't warm. It wasn't cold. It was startled. Doreen's jaw tightened. "You're doing this to make a point." "No," I said calmly. "I'm doing this because you said I'd never build anything." For a moment, he looked like he might argue. Instead, he scanned the room again, as if trying to reconcile the empty house with the son he once dismissed. Lenora finally spoke. "You didn't have to do this." Maybe she meant the purchase. Maybe she meant succeeding without them. I stepped aside so they could collect the last folder from the kitchen counter. Doreen paused at the door. "You think money fixes everything," he said quietly. I met his eyes. "No. But it buys the house." He left without another word. And for the first time, I felt something close to closure. The house echoed when I walked through it. Empty walls. Scuffed hardwood floors. Faint rectangles where family photos once hung. My footsteps sounded unfamiliar, like I was trespassing in a memory. I made it halfway across the living room when the front door creaked open again. I turned. My father stood there. Doreen must have forgotten something. A folder was tucked under his arm. For a second, neither of us spoke. His eyes scanned the room, then landed on me. Confusion flickered first. Then recognition. "What are you doing here?" he asked. I didn't raise my voice. "I live here." He frowned. "The house is sold." "I know." Silence stretched between us. "You're renting?" he asked, almost dismissively. "I bought it." The words settled heavy in the air. His posture stiffened. Through who? Through me. Lenora appeared behind him, breath catching when she saw my face. Callum.
It wasn't warm. It wasn't cold. It was startled. Doreen's jaw tightened.
You're doing this to make a point.
No, I said calmly.
I'm doing this because you said I'd never build anything.
For a moment, he looked like he might argue.
Instead, he scanned the room again, as if trying to reconcile the empty house with the son he once dismissed.
Lenora finally spoke.
You didn't have to do this.
Maybe she meant the purchase. Maybe she meant succeeding without them.
I stepped aside so they could collect the last folder from the kitchen counter.
Doreen paused at the door.
You think money fixes everything, he said quietly.
I met his eyes. No.
But it buys the house.
He left without another word. And for the first time, I felt something close to closure.
Reeves Industrial was acquired 6 months later. Not in a triumphant merger. In a quiet asset liquidation. The company my father spent 3 decades building didn't collapse overnight. It just slowly lost relevance.
Contracts moved elsewhere. Leadership shifted.
Brenner took a consulting role in another state.
Doreen retired without ceremony. And I didn't attend a single meeting about it.
Life inside the house felt different now. Lighter. On Saturdays, the garage filled with the sound of keyboards clicking and teenagers arguing over code. One of them, a shy kid named Trenton Vale, reminded me painfully of who I used to be, brilliant but unsure if anyone saw it. One evening, as I locked up the workshop, I saw a familiar sedan parked across the street.
Lenora stepped out. She didn't walk up immediately.
She stood there, looking at the house the way someone studies a memory they can't quite return to.
I crossed the lawn first.
You didn't have to buy it, she said softly.
I know. She nodded, eyes scanning the windows.
We were afraid you'd fail.
I looked at her carefully.
You weren't afraid I'd fail.
She swallowed.
You were afraid I wouldn't.
That landed.
For once, she didn't argue. There was no dramatic reconciliation.
No hug.
No sudden apology that erased years of silence. Just understanding. After she left, I walked back into the garage and installed a small brushed metal plaque above the main workbench.
3 words. Built anyway. Not out of spite.
Not for revenge.
But because when the door closed and the porch light went out, I kept building.
And that made all the difference.